Hi everyone, my name is Miss Reasso and I'm going to share some helpful hints for your Mat 152 Chapters 3 and 4 lab. So like always, you have your objectives listed first, and then we want to make sure that we complete our work on this paper or insert pictures of our work into this document because all of our answers should be handwritten. We should not be typing any answers. Okay. Other than your notes, calculator, or reaching out to your instructor, you should not be receiving any outside help, whether that's from other people, electronics, tutors, or apps. And make sure you are submitting the lab correctly as a single PDF through Gradescope. And there are extra directions for that in Blackboard. Okay. And like always, if you're doing something mathematical that involves calculations, make sure you show your work. And we want to make sure we put units on our values as well as round as indicated. Now, if there is some question where we are asked to provide an explanation, those should be written in complete sentences with correct grammar. So this lab focuses on chapter 3 and 4. Mostly it's going to focus on chapter 3, and really the last page is what is on chapter 4. So we are going to look at our measures of central tendency and our measures of spread, as well as some of our visuals like our box and whisker plot. Okay. So the first thing we're going to be looking at is our basic statistics. These are going to be usually from our calculator. And we're going to be using that exact same data that we used on the first lab. So you'll just want to go access it and make sure that you put it in your calculator and double check it. So the first three values we really are calculating are our mean, median, and mode here. So you'll notice on your sample mean, it wants you to put your symbol there first, right? Median and mode don't have a special symbol, but we want to make sure we provide that for values that do when we're asked for them. And then you will find the value in your calculator. And we're not usually going to say in the real world that the sample mean is this number without any sort of context. So we like to use interpretations that are context-based. So for example, in our first one, we might say in the sample of our, male RCC students, the blank, we're not going to use the word mean here. We're going to use some descriptor of the word mean. Height was approximately and the number we calculated. So we're not just ever going to flat out say this is the number without some sort of background context about where the number is coming from. And the same thing for your median and mode. You can use the means interpretation here as an example. Then we also talked about central tendency. So again, make sure that you are using the correct symbols for your standard deviation and variance. And then range, again, we don't have a special symbol for that. Now, part 2 is Chebyshev. I know we all love Chebyshev so much, but it is an important concept because it tells us the amount of data that falls within so many standard deviations of our mean for any distribution, right? So we want to make sure that we use the sample mean we calculated along with the standard deviation. Make sure you use the rounded values that you have here. Don't keep all the decimal places when you're doing your calculations down here. And we're going to find our Chebyshev's theorem for 2 standard deviations. You'll put your percentage here and you'll calculate those values. And there's enough room here to show your work for that. Okay. Once you find those 2 values, you're going to mark them on the number line. So maybe you have 65.5. You'll mark that between the 65 and the 66. And then maybe you have 73.2. You would mark that above your 73, but below your 74. And that will show you the bounds of your interval. So anything inside of that is what would fall within the standard deviations. Anything outside of those 2 like ticks would not be in that percentage. So from this dot plot, from our sample, we can see that some count, you're going to count your dots of the 54, your number might be different in that sample, had the heights that fell within the 2 standard deviations. And then you'll calculate that percentage there. Okay, so we're really comparing if our sample fits the theorem, right? And then we're going to do the same thing, but for 3 standard deviations from the mean. And then after that, like I said, we're going to compare if our sample met the requirements. So you'll say yes or no, and then explain why or why not. Okay. Then we have our visual data here also for our box and whisker plot. Box and whisker plots were another way we can see the spread of our data when we're talking about position as opposed to distinct values, right? So our first thing we want to do here is label our values for our 5-number summary. You can use the other box plot you have as kind of a guide to help you label them. But we can see here that we need to label the 5-number summary for the females, and you can just label them right beside the whisker endpoints and the box endpoints as well as your median. And along with that, you're going to answer some questions. And then part D wants you to make a comparative observation between the 2 groups. So make sure you are comparing your male box plot in some way to your female box plot. And be specific. Make sure you use values, right? This is a math class. We're looking specifically at numbers as well as context. Okay. Then we're going to compare grouped data versus raw data. So we are going to find the mean and standard deviation of a frequency distribution. So first thing you need to do is find your midpoints, and then we'll use those midpoints in L1 and the frequencies in L2, along with the 1-bar stats to calculate your mean and your standard deviation for the distribution. And you can go back to 3.2 if you need to see some extra help on how to do this. And then once you find those 2 values, specifically, you're going to be comparing the mean height from what you just found based off of the distribution and what you found from number 1 from the raw data. Okay. And if they were close, you can say yes or no, and then explain in a complete sentence or sentences, sorry, why they are or are not close. Okay. And then our very last question here is what is coming from chapter 4. So everything else was basically chapter 3. Now we're going to look at chapter 4. So most of the questions you have done usually make you calculate first and then use those calculations to answer questions. These are going to be more of, here's the answer, let's get an interpretation from that answer. So there is a scatter plot here, and we have some questions we want to answer, right? How is our correlation, and what type of correlation is it? And then maybe some example about why we think this situation is happening, right? Why we might see a correlation here. And then number 3, or part 3, I guess, we are looking at our correlation coefficient. So this has already been calculated for us. And then we want to find the coefficient of determination and then how much is explained and maybe give some interpretation as to why that might occur. Okay. So what might that difference in variability be? And then similar for part B, we're given values, our y-intercept and our slope, and we want to put that into our equation and then use that equation to make a prediction. And again, just make sure you show your work for that. And that is all of our lab. So again, there's a rubric at the bottom to kind of help guide you with what you might need to make sure you answer. And then if you have any questions at all, please be sure to reach out to your instructor.